Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a Saturday morning. My name is Steven, and I'm the host, as always. Excuse the little raspiness, starting to come down with a cold. It is that time of year. Get your flu shots, take emergency, all that good stuff, especially if you work in a school like I do. Joining me this morning is my guy, Tyler, who I think was a little sick last week, so he can vouch for that a little bit. But Tyler, how are you doing this morning?
Much better. Yeah, I got mine during break, which is good and bad at the same time. Yeah, that's a classic move for me, is to get sick when I have time off. But I'm feeling much better now. And I'll tell you what, Steven, the season stinks. Chargers are 4-7. They have a snore fest of a game coming up against the Patriots. They might not even have Keenan Allen. But you know what's good? Is talking about the draft. I opened up 2024 draft grades. I've watched one game of Brock Bowers.
Hey.
Believe it or not, I know it has officially begun. And I'll tell you what, things are looking up. And Brock Bowers is pretty good.
Yeah, that Brock Bowers guy is really good. So our guy Austin Xavier, I don't know if he's in the chat today, but he's a Chargers fan who lives in Buffalo. He's been one of our longest supporters. He's actually going to the game on Sunday. Tomorrow.
Bless.
So wish him well. I hope the weather is at least nice, and I haven't even looked at that, but hopefully the Patriots fans treat him well. Any other Chargers fans that's going to this game, I respect it, and it could not be me personally, but should be fun. We'll talk about the game today. And we're gonna talk about the draft a little bit, some draft implications on today's show. But yeah, the Brock Bowers stuff, man. I was looking at things yesterday. You have the Dalton Kincaid, my guy, obviously, Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave, Jake Ferguson, Trey McBride. This is probably the best group of young tight ends in the league that we've seen in quite some time. And this era of Chargers football has really made me appreciate tight ends and quality tight ends. Like, the advantage that you have with an above average tight end in the NFL right now is extremely high. So I'm very jealous of all these teams that have a great young tight end. Hopefully the Chargers can get one in Brock Bowers next year. We'll see where they end up picking. But the 2020 Chargers team made me appreciate good offensive line coaching more. This era of Chargers football has made me really appreciate great tight end play. Shout out to Antonio Gates, future Hall of Famer, obviously. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's where things are at for me. I just I watch these teams. I watched Jake Ferguson on Thursday night and was like, man, that'd be really nice to have right now.
Yeah, especially after Hunter Henry. Henry was never Antonio Gates, right? That was never, ever going to happen. But there was always just a steady 4 catches, 40 yards, 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown or something. It was always very steady, and you really do miss that production. I don't know why they will not give it to Gerald Everett as much. That's a whole different topic. I do believe he could fit into that top 10-ish group of tight ends, but it doesn't get the ball a whole lot. But yeah, the tight end classes, especially this past one, of course, really solid contributors. It's nice for the Ravens to lose Mark Andrews, but still have Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar and then these guys, just to continue to roll through these tight ends and not feel so depleted and not lose your scheme as much, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree about Gerald Everett, and we know that Justin Herbert has had an affinity for his tight end play. I mean, Hunter Henry had a great season. Jared Cook had a good season at his age with the Chargers. Gerald Everett last year. The lack of Everett this year has been a bit weird to me, especially with all of the injuries at wide receiver. But we'll see what it is. All right. Today we are going to have an eye towards the draft, not necessarily talk about like the 2024 class by any means. But the fan base seems to have moved on from the season. So we felt like, last week when I was gone, Tyler and Alex spoke about like the coaching issues that have kind of plagued this team. And so now we're going to kind of pivot towards roster construction. And obviously, Tom Telesco has been the Chargers GM for 11 years, but specifically this era, because I believe that Brandon Staley has had a much larger hand in the roster construction than previous Chargers coaches have. So I think it's fair to bucket the two of them together for the state of the roster and the way that things have panned out. So we're going to look at the Chargers draft history of the past 3 years, see what kind of lessons we can take from that, and see how that stacks up to the AFC and NFC contenders right now, and look at how potentially the Chargers can kind of use the draft to rebound into the next phase of Chargers football. Justin Herbert obviously is going to be very expensive. The Chargers have a lot of dead cap next year. So the draft is obviously going to be the key thing here. Tyler, you have prepared a slideshow for this, and we'll dive into it. But when you look at this from like a broad sense, what's your biggest lesson that you have learned from the last 3 years in terms of the Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco 3 draft classes?
There's a couple of different directions we could go here. I think one is sort of what we've already just talked about, which is you need to anticipate when draft classes are stronger than others at certain positions. I think it was a rather significant failure, and now officially sort of has been, for the Chargers to take a receiver in the first round of a quote unquote not great wide receiver class, and then not take a tight end at all in a great tight end class. And now you feel like you might need both this upcoming class, which is a horrible outcome anyway, but you need a tight end and you're praying for Bowers. But after that, you look at the consensus board and, things change all the time. There really isn't a guy out there. So now you're praying for Brock Bowers, or you also have no money in free agency and Gerald Everett is gone. And so you could be stuck looking at a very, very rough tight end group next season. Yeah. So I think they need to do a better job of anticipating when classes are stronger and when they're weaker. You and I don't think ever took a receiver in the first round of our mock drafts this past season because we felt so strongly about the second round, the third round, the fourth round. And as much as, fans, and even we'll talk about, like, I think you and I either in second or third and second had Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison as 2 and 3 or 3 and 2, whatever it was. But we never took them because we felt like we could find guys later on. And even looking at this group, assume the Chargers even took Zay Flowers or Jordan Addison and assume they had the same production as they do right now in their current offenses. Both guys are projected for less than 1,000 receiving yards this season. Does that mean it's a failure? No. And I'd love to be close to 1,000 and further away from 200 like other receivers that the Chargers may have taken. But you understand the strength of the draft is both the depth of this past draft, which is evident in the production so far, and also this upcoming draft. This upcoming draft is so good at receiver that Marvin Harrison Jr. is in it and is the wide receiver 1. But there are people who go, it is actually almost close because there are potentially 2 other guys who are challenging, who could be legit wide receiver 1s in any class, but it only happens to be in the Marvin Harrison Jr. class. They're so good. And now the Chargers will have to pray for Brock Bowers and roll with Quentin Johnson, who they took at the top in the first round of a not so great receiver class. It's tough. I think the Chargers need to do a better job of anticipating how the drafts are going to play out. It's not always perfect. Like, you should not, and I don't think they did this, but you don't not take a tight end last year in anticipation of Brock Bowers this year. No one does that, right? So that's never going to happen. And I don't think they did that, but you need to anticipate when the classes are stronger and just looking at your roster. the Chargers they basically drafted a wide receiver 4 in the first round this past year. And that's a critical error. So that's part of it. There are definitely more. You could take, I think, 2 other lessons just from this Quentin Johnson pick alone.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Really quickly, the Chargers are traveling, so they're earlier news release than usual. LD Broom pointing this out in the chat, so appreciate him. The Chargers have signed Alex Erickson to the active roster. Obviously, Keenan Allen has been injured. Alex Erickson is out of practice squad elevation, so some wide receiver insurance. I didn't see who was released, but Alex Erickson is on the active roster. And then Steven Anderson, who they signed obviously to the practice squad a couple of weeks ago, is up for tomorrow's game. Obviously, Nick Van Nett is out with a concussion, so Steven Anderson will take that role. Obviously, last week it was Hunter Kampmoyer who only played the 1 snap, but Steven Anderson up for tomorrow's game.
Interesting. I wonder who's. I can open up the Chargers. Oh, they didn't do it yet. Usually they have like the corresponding reading that says who they let go. Oh, Elijah Dotson. That's who was released.
Shit.
So there goes any potential spark for. I mean, I understand why the RB4 who's not playing is released for the tight end / fullback who you probably are going to play. It's just unfortunate that was the corresponding one, which means Spiller is the 3rd. All right. So yeah, Elijah Dotson has been released. In terms of snaps and his role, of course, like that is who you release. That's who we talked about. If Jalen Guyton came back, that's kind of who we talked about. But yeah, well, that's neat.
Yeah, I mean he hasn't played since like week 2, but frustrating allocation of resources for sure. Which can certainly be its own show at this point. But yeah, I think, for me, one of the biggest takeaways from like the last 3 drafts in particular is certain weaknesses are never anticipated, and some of that is understandable, but the Chargers have always preferred to bank on player development and get competition through like undrafted free agents or cheap veterans or things like that. Whereas you want to talk about like anticipating needs, we've all seen what has happened with the cornerback room. We've seen over the years what has happened with the offensive line room, with the wide receiver room, and not really anticipating that need. So you look at what happened with last year's wide receiver room, right? So they take Josh Palmer in 2021. They don't take any wide receivers in 2022. And all of the receivers get injured. And so you're left with DeAndre Carter, Michael Bandy, Josh Palmer for a several week stretch. And how do you overcompensate that? You take 2 receivers in the next draft. That's kind of what Tom Telesco has always done. He did that with Joe Reed and KJ Hill back in the day. And obviously those guys didn't really become anything, unfortunately. So it's just for me, like, especially at premium positions, like I think you should just always be taking shots at a pass rusher, at a cornerback, at a wide receiver. Obviously you can't do them every single year, but definitely more than the Chargers have done in the past. Like I think, when the Bengals made the Super Bowl back in 2021, I went back and looked and wrote an article at that time about like the lessons that the Chargers could take from the Rams and the Bengals. And one of the things I always noticed about the Bengals is that they were drafting wide receivers like every other year, like pretty consistently. And you just never know, like when do these guys become a hit? Like, did they need to take Andre Yoshivas this year? No, probably not. But T. Higgins has been hurt. Jamar Chase has been hurt. So that guy becomes your valuable, depth piece, and maybe he becomes a key starter down the stretch. And like you look through their history, and like that's always something that they have believed in. And obviously, when you have these kind of receivers, like they're not going to be able to afford T. Higgins next year, and so like those guys are going to be able to come in and step into bigger roles. So those premium positions for me, like that's the lesson. Like you need to invest in premium positions at a much higher frequency And then that gives you some more cushion in case things don't pan out. Because right now, Asante Samuel Jr. has taken a step back. Michael Davis is taking a step back. He's not even playing right now. JC Jackson, stuff like that. If you had taken a rookie cornerback, then you don't have that big of a drop off. You have at least like a valuable draft asset who could potentially be taking these minutes. Maybe like, maybe not, maybe you don't take Brian Branch, but maybe you take a guy who can play in the slot in like the third round, the fourth round, and you're playing that guy right now instead of Isang Bassi. I thought he played well, but like he was a veteran free agent off the street. So that for me is the key lesson, is like these premium positions, you have to invest more frequently. I'm not saying like first round, second round, I have to like all that stuff, but just throw darts at these premium positions every other year and see what happens. Maybe you land into a great situation with one of these guys. The Colts right now drafted that 7th round corner Jalen Jones from Texas A&M, and he's been a great starter for them. The Cowboys with DeRon Bland, they threw a dart in the 5th round. They didn't need a cornerback that year, but he's become a consistent contributor for them. He leads the NFL in interceptions this year. You just never know. And so that's the takeaway for me. These premium positions, you have to invest more frequently. And even if you have a guy, like, it doesn't hurt to draft a 5th round edge rusher like next year or whatever the case may be. Just because you have a guy like Chris Rumph who's presumably your edge 3, just take one. You never know what happens.
No, that's great. That was definitely one of my 3 points that I wanted to bring up, is the investment in premium positions. I wish the Quentin Johnson pick were working out better, and I wish we saw anything more, because I don't want them to shy away from investing in a receiver in the first round in the future, although who knows who's making the calls. But their investment in a premium position in the second round with Thule is obviously paying off. Didn't know how much he was going to play. Could have argued earlier in the season, in the preseason, that Chris Rumph might have been the 3A or whatever, but he never got on the field in week 1. And lo and behold, it's Thule. And now you feel so much better. As Jason pointed out, I lost the comment. Here it is. As Jason pointed out, draft at least one receiver, edge, and DB in most every draft. And I agree. The corner position this past year was tough to anticipate, although JC, who knows. But going into this year, I think you felt good. I thought they'd bring back Bryce Callahan, but you felt good about the idea of Asante Samuel Jr., Michael Davis coming off the season that he had, JC Jackson hopefully returning. That's just like a bonus there. Jaw Taylor looked good in very brief spurts, but overall you felt good about the group. And then the Chargers didn't take a single defensive back in this past draft. And I don't know where the better pick would have been. I don't know who the better pick could have been, but I certainly don't think you had to go get Max Duggan, instead of another corner or a tackle for what it's worth, or a receiver or whoever. And you really didn't need to go get Deion Henley. I think that I like the Henley pick in anticipation of what will occur next season. I assume he's in line to start. Depending on who leaves, either one or both of the linebackers are leaving, but he's projected to start. So I do like the anticipation there. It just feels like if that's such an unessential, non-essential pick or a player or position for your team, investing a 3rd round pick in that is pretty rough. And before that was JT Woods. I understand why. Again, that was anticipation of Nasir Adderley leaving, but I just feel you got to sometimes invest in the premium. And that 2022 class, the lack of investment in premium positions is basically what is killing them. JT, a safety, even Zion Johnson as a guard. I understand why you take him. I like the idea of taking Zion Johnson, but he was non-premium position. Could have been Jermaine Johnson, could have been McDuffie, whatever. But I understand why they took Johnson. But then Woods, you go safety, you go running back, then you go defensive tackle, then you go technically guard, although Sawyer played tackle. And then you hit your DBs, and lo and behold, the DBs are actually the ones that you feel better about in the 6th. And then you go fullback right after that.
Yeah.
And just the lack of premium positions was rough. And I think the good news is I feel like they kind of learned from that this past season in 2023. So yeah, keep loading those guys up, and you should be better in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get this slideshow up here. Tyler put a lot of work into this. I, as someone who is a visual learner, appreciate the organization of this. So I do have to say that. But you look at the 3 draft classes as a whole. For our audio audience, these are the guys obviously on the pick. For 2021, you had Rashawn Slater, Asante Samuel Jr., Josh Palmer, Trey McKitty, Chris Rumph, Brendan Hymus, Nick Neiman, Larry Roundtree, Mark Webb. And then you had 2022, Zion Johnson, obviously traded the 2nd round pick for Khalil Mack. You had JT Woods, Isaiah Spiller, like Tyler just mentioned, Otito Ogbonia, Jamari Sawyer, Jasir Taylor, Dean Leonard, Xander Horvath. And then in 2023, obviously the most recent one, you had Quentin Johnston, Tui Pelotu, Deion Henley, Darius Davis, Jordan McFadden, Scott Matlock, and obviously Max Duggan. So those are 3 classes that we're really focusing on in this conversation. We always like to kind of grade draft prospects based off of like their grades sorted into high-end starters, high-end players, future starter, strong number 3 / future starter, in a pinch, practice squad, all that stuff. So Tyler, how did you kind of go about this in terms of sorting these players out?
It was tough because there's a lot of asterisks here when players have been hurt, so my sorting here for people that are looking at this on YouTube and watching this live or whatever, the assumption is that all Chargers players are healthy, so like, okay, what would their role sort of be if everyone's healthy? Like technically, some guys are starters, but like, are they really, because injuries happens. I don't know if it's fair to call them a starter. So I really wanted to break them up into almost like grades, like we have sort of done with like projections for draft prospects, but then like sort each of the 4 columns. So I have starter, primary, backup, mostly depth, and then, the other guys, right, off the 53-man roster altogether. And I think within there should be a subdivision, because we can say that Tom Telesco, Brandon Staley have drafted several starters, but like there's a difference between starting and being a good starter. And I think I do want to make that distinction there. There's a difference between being a backup or a strong number 3 and just being a backup because you naturally exist at that spot, and you are just a backup because you're the next guy in line.
Sure.
So stuff like that. So I really wanted to try to differentiate between the 2. And it really was unfortunate to make this this graphic, to be completely honest, because really the only high-end starter, again, asterisk over Tuli Tuipulotu there, maybe Josh Palmer, like you could consider them starters. But that's, again, if the roster is healthy, I don't know. But it stinks that of the 24 selections in these 3 drafts, the really only high-end starter you can pull out of those 24 is Rashawn Slater. And frankly, that's probably the easiest pick you possibly could have made out of any of these selections here. Like that, it's Rashawn Slater at 13. Like that didn't take a whole lot of brain power.
Yeah.
Just had to deviate from your norm of prospect size, I guess, right? He wasn't the tallest, but otherwise, like, it's not a great group. And the other category is kind of killing them with Zion, Asante, et cetera. So yeah, it was rough making this one. I was trying to find a way to, like I wanted it to be positive. I wanted to see more out of this, but breaking them up into, instead of 4 categories, breaking them up into the 8, you really just, you hate to see it. You hate to see this group. There's a lot of good players in here, several good players in here, but the lack of true quality starters is unfortunate.
Yeah, and obviously, like you said, assumption on all Chargers being healthy in this instance is so maybe Tuli kind of moves over a category, and next year I probably would have him move over a category, but right now if all Chargers players are healthy, he is a future starter, not a strong starter. So I think when you're looking at draft classes, like obviously the goal I think would be to find at least like one high-end starter in every single class, and we'll look at some of these other contenders and see like what their classes are looking like. But in general, like you're trying to get obviously more players in the left as opposed to the right. And right now with just Rashawn Slater being a high-end starter, it's unfortunate. Like I think you look at Zion Johnson, and I think like the expectations, obviously, when you draft a guard in the first round, and it was a guy that that I was in favor of drafting because I felt like he was an immediate starter for that team, and a stronger investment in protecting Justin Herbert is always a good thing. But he hasn't returned that kind of investment, obviously. I think with where they were drafted, I think you objectively probably feel better about what Jamari Sawyer has given this team, because he was a 6th-round pick. He was a fine left tackle. He's a fine right guard. Zion is also a fine guard, but he was a 1st-round pick. Like, you are not drafting a guard in the 1st round for fine. I love Zion. I think he can potentially become that player, but I gave the Dallas Cowboys a lot of shit that year because Jerry Jones came out and said they felt like Tyler Smith was the best guard prospect. And turns out he has been. He's been arguably the best left guard in the league this year. So that's when you draft a guard in the 1st round, that's the stuff that you're looking for. And I thought that Zion Johnson could be that, but he hasn't been. And so that's the kind of decision that you make that can really hurt your draft class. You draft Asante Samuel Jr. in the 2nd round, and it's been inconsistent. You're not necessarily drafting a 2nd round pick every single year expecting a high-end starter, but you're definitely expecting an above average starter. And again, I love Asante, but he has been far too inconsistent and hasn't shown enough growth in his 3rd season in the areas where you're really looking for. He's still a complete liability in run defense, for example. So it's been frustrating because the guys who you are investing top 100 picks in have not shown the signs that you are investing in. And one of them is literally inactive and can't even get on the field over Dean Marlowe. So it's definitely, when you put it into perspective like this, it definitely is frustrating to look at.
Yeah, LDE Bruin, I don't know if he's specifically referring to what I'm referring to, but regards to coaching, like the step backwards, like these classes, the 2022 class probably in particular, but I felt so much better about a lot of these guys heading into this season than they are currently panning out. And it's almost an across the board, not breakdown, but regression for everyone outside of Rashawn, who's dealing with 3 injuries and a really couple tough, 2 different high ankle sprains, which is ridiculous. But the regression from Zion, Jamari seems kind of like a wash there. You could say it's progression, but you can't really tell. Zont's regression, and then everybody else that they drafted. Like, it's a bummer to see most of these guys either go backwards or remain stagnant. I understand if you take JT Woods in the hopes that he develops, it's tough to say because he has not played and we have no idea what the illness is. But someone like Isaiah Spiller, him not even be able to be active on game day it's just so unfortunate. Yeah. And so, yeah, if you look at the other classes, and we will from some other contenders, it's just the ability to find guys that both contribute meaningful snaps, who could, maybe fit in like the other category, but are also good starters at their positions. And then for the Chargers to only have Rashawn Slater out of the 24, and really, only Rashawn Slater out of, say, let's say 6 or 9 first, second, and third round picks is not great.
Yeah, and I know real quick, some people were confused about this. Xander Horvath is no longer on the practice squad. He was released in place of Austin Pleasance, who they brought back after he spent training camp with them. So Xander and Mark Webb have both come back for brief practice squad stints, but neither have panned out. And I think that could be something to take away too, is that a lot of these Chargers players are drafted and like the first thing they say is like special teams. Whereas like other teams draft players in the 3rd and 4th rounds, expecting them to be contributors, and then they'll teach them how to be special teams players. And that, I think, could be its own takeaway with Xander, with Chris Rumph and Nick Niemann, and Deion Henley, and it's like the first thing they talk about is like special teams. It's like, okay, but you're investing premium picks here, and so it's just that, I think, could certainly be its own takeaway as well.
Yeah, that one the good news is, if you say we took a player and also special teams is their main thing, the good news is that these days it looks better. Like the special teams, you drafted special teams players and the special teams is also good. Thank goodness. Like we're finally in that point. But still, like, yeah, that, and then just the 7th, 6th, and 7th round guys. I know that those guys are not always supposed to be. They're not the best prospects. There's a reason: an injury, poor testing, not great film, not great stats, or whatever. But you look at some of these classes, especially from some of the guys that are contenders, and they just, the 6th and 7th round guys, maybe they've done some special teams work, but some of them hit. And I just think you got to start aiming for, not a fullback, not a quarterback in those rounds, and try to find any dart throw at a premium position guy instead.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's get to the next part here. We're at 30 minutes. So as a whole, this graph on the screen right now was prepared by our guy Arjun. Go Big Blue today for Arjun. This is weighing team draft success by round from 2012 to 2022. This does not include 2023. But this is where the Chargers have been at. They are 5th worst in the league over that time frame in the amount of value that they have added in the draft. And that is including quarterbacks, including Justin Herbert, obviously, including Rashawn Slater, these guys who are producing a ton of value for the team. But I think, first of all, you look at this and like the margin is super slim. Like it's not that difficult to see the Chargers moving up this list in the future. But outside of the Bengals, you look at these other teams at the bottom, and it's a lot of like very bad teams over the last few years. Whereas, the best teams in the league, which we'll get into here in a minute, are consistently at the top. I mean, outside of the like current Patriots and current Saints, like those guys were, dominating the late 2010s. You see the Cowboys there, the Chiefs, the Rams, the Colts, the Lions, who have really kicked it up a notch recently, the Eagles. So the draft is such a valuable resource, and like, but the teams that we're going to talk about here in a minute do very specific things that the Chargers have not done over the last 3 years. And I think those are that's the kind of edges that you're looking for to rebound into the next Chargers era, where hopefully we can be looking at them in a much more positive light in terms of draft success.
So those who are watching, the black arrow is pointed at the Chargers. I apologize that this graph is not the easiest to read, but the takeaway is easy to understand. I think what's also worth pointing out is just checking out the 90th percentile for a lot of these teams. And you look at where the Chargers are here, and it's 4 players, maybe in the 90th percentile or better. It's pretty barren over there. And frankly, over about 85%, there's still only 4 players, where even you look at the team above them, like the Texans, there's 6, 7, 8 players in that range, which basically means the Chargers are, they're getting okay picks and maybe some Bs in here, and that keeps them above some other players. But the lack of true, legit, starting Pro Bowl, All-Pro, great players is pretty damning to the whole draft process for them. And it certainly was. I'm curious how this would look just Staley era. I think Telesco has drafted better the past 3 years than his first 3 years, or even the next set of
years. First 3 years were not good.
Awful, right? And also giving it and trading up for those players as well. Yeah. But yeah, the gap here between about 85% to 100%, to only have 4 players there, where you can even look at like the Raiders, who we kind of laugh at all the time as being a poorly drafting team, and they certainly almost always have been. Even they have maybe 7 players in the 85th percentile or higher there. Honestly, looking at that, I'm surprised the Chargers are not lower, but I assume there must be some cluster in here somewhere where they are getting, a good like floor to their picks, I guess, relative to the other teams, but they're just not, there's no home runs. There's barely even triples here.
Yeah. And that's a tough way to live in today's NFL. So, appreciate Arjun for doing this draft, or doing this graph work, if you will. Always appreciate him. It's very helpful to visualize things like this. All right, so let's look at these AFC and NFC contenders again. This is the same draft period. Obviously, we could go back and look at several draft classes here, but on the screen, for those who can't see, and apologies that this is a little bit zoomed out, but you have, thank you, Tyler, took our faces off the screen there. But you have the last 3 draft classes for the Baltimore Ravens, for the Kansas City Chiefs, for the Detroit Lions, and for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think a lot of this can put into perspective how difficult the draft is. But also, like I mentioned, I think you see key principles here for each of these teams. So, Tyler, when you look at these 4 teams and compare them to like what the Chargers have had, what's your big takeaway here?
Draft board movement that is beneficial to the team's ability to go get not just more players, but higher quality players.
Yeah.
Each of these teams has a set or maybe multiple sets of drafts where they have more than one first rounder. Now, do the Chargers have? I mean, they do, but are they trading away Matt Stafford for a couple of firsts? That's not happening, obviously. Some of these teams, they don't have Tyreek Hill to trade away. That's not happening. So I understand that you can't always get multiple first round picks in multiple drafts. I don't expect that all the time, but the Ravens over here, whether these picks panned out or not, found a way to move around the board in, let's say, 2022, where they accumulated 6 fourth round picks. And I'm not saying all the Chargers fourth round picks have been rosy, but boy, I would have loved a lot more of these guys that are in the top 150. Being able to move around, I think, is so critical and so key. The Eagles do it all the time, and that just gives them ammunition to go find a player that is someone that they want later on. They can move around and go get X player because they've accumulated one more pick in some other draft. So in the off chance that someone's sitting right in front of them and they need them, they can go get them.
Yeah.
The Lions, of course, moving around again, they're able to trade, but they also traded back. Like Jahmyr Gibbs was not, they said they would have taken him at 9 or whatever it was, but they got him at 12. Is that a good pick? I don't know, but at least they traded back and got him, right?
Yeah.
Like, would the Quentin Johnson pick have been, a whole lot better if the Chargers traded back to 27 and gotten him? Not really, but maybe they would have had a 5th round pick in there because of it, or a 4th round pick in there, and they could have taken, I don't know, another player that didn't pan out, but at least they took another one. So, like, at least that process is good. Whether it works out or not, it's a different story. But I like the process of these players or these teams moving around.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things there in terms of like trading assets, and also the Ravens are kind of like the kings of like the comp pick formula. Like that was their 2022 draft class. Like they had a ton of compensatory picks from their 2021 group of free agents leaving. So that's why they have so many 4th round picks there. But overall, like the general philosophy, I think, of all of these teams is more shots, more darts to throw at the board as opposed to less. Like, of course, you can trade up from time to time. Obviously the Eagles have traded up a few times for these players. They traded up to get Devontae Smith, for example. But in general, you want more picks than your traditional 7. And like with Tom Telesco, like even in the 2022 class, where he had those 4 7th round picks that were compensatory picks, who knows what they turn out to be, right? Or I think it was two others, an extra 6 and an extra 7th. He traded back with the Bears to get his 6th round pick back from the Khalil Mack trade, and he was like, "I got my pick back," and like that's Telesco, right? Like he holds on to his picks and he doesn't play the board, and the only time he really does play the board is when he trades up to go get a player that his coach really likes. And so, I think in general, you want more picks, not less. This upcoming year, who knows what happens in terms of like compensatory picks. Who knows what happens in potentially trading Mike Williams or Joey or Khalil or whatever the case may be. Theoretically, the Chargers should have more picks next year, but it can't stop for next year. You have to do this every single year. And, these teams have these multiple shots at the board. And again, you just never know when you can find a guy like a Jalen Watson for the Chiefs who has become a consistent cornerback starter, or Isaiah Pacheco, who Alex loves to always bring up. He is, their running back starter. If the Chiefs had taken like the Chargers mentality of like holding on to a 1st round pick, they never draft Isaiah Pacheco, and they're still trying to make Clyde Edwards-Helaire work, as opposed to like, hey, like let's just throw a shot here. Who knows? We'll see what happens. And Isaiah Pacheco has been a legitimate difference maker for them. Brian Cook has become a legitimate starter for them again in the second round. So it's just you want as many shots at the dartboard as possible. And then again, some of this is hit or miss, but you're trying to get at least one difference maker in every single draft. And I think all of these teams have done that. And then you're looking for ideally three legitimate starters in every class. But if you can get at least one high-end starter, one legitimate starter alongside that, then I think that is generally a win. And so those are the key things I think I'm looking at is more picks and more legit starters, obviously.
And then the other conversation comes down to, okay, even if you swapped out the Chargers classes for the Chiefs, I know fits are weird, but let's just pretend. What does Brandon Staley do with the Chiefs 2022 class? Now, I know Karlaftis probably pans out because Gift Smith can make it work, right?
Sure.
Gift Smith, Jay Rogers, they'll make that work. Any edge player, D tackle player, probably be good. But what is Trent McDuffie doing in Brandon Staley's scheme? What is Sky Moore doing with Kellen Moore? Let's say we use Sky Moore like the Chargers have been using Quentin Johnston. Is Brian Cook any bit good? The Chiefs draft class, yes, they played a lot in year one, but it was also about the continued development into year two for them. And that's what makes the Chiefs more like contenders this year and one of the best defenses in the NFL right now. Whereas the Chargers are completely going backwards because their 2022 class, which we liked a lot, is 2022 class? No, 2021 class. Regardless, the 2022 class for the Chargers for the Chiefs, holy cow, took a step forward, whereas the Chargers classes have not.
Yeah, you look at what the Chiefs are getting from Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, not so much Sky Moore. That pick hasn't panned out, which I think a lot of people were very upset about when that happened.
Yes.
But Brian Cook, Leo Chenal, these guys have all taken legitimate steps forward. Darian Kennard hasn't really become anything. I don't even think he's on their team anymore. But Jalen Watson has been a key, CB4 for them and be a reliable starter. Isaiah Pacheco is their starting running back. So, again, it's just the investment in premium positions in the later rounds, and you just never know like when you can find a legitimate starter there. And so, I think when you look at these other teams, the playing of the board, the premium positions, it all stands out as advantages that they have gotten over the Chargers over the last few years. And again, some of these players, like we don't know, what the case may be. Jalen Carter is not even playing for, or not Jalen Carter, excuse me. Obviously, Jalen Carter is playing; he's freaking really amazing. But Nolan Smith is like barely played for the Eagles. But hey, like next year, if you're not playing without Brandon Graham, maybe Nolan Smith is your guy. So
yeah,
some of that is to be determined. But they're getting value out of Sidney Brown right now. They're getting value out of Tyler Steen right now. And so it's just, those premium positions, multiple picks, playing the board, those are all areas that can turn things around. I know this has probably been like really negative, but the beauty, I think, of the NFL draft is that when you really hit on a class, it can really turn your franchise around in a hurry. Look at what the Lions 2021 class is right now for them. Panay Sewell, Aleem McNeil, Amon-Ra St. Brown are legitimate franchise cornerstones for them who are building this thing out for them. And now they're, winning the division. Like the Detroit Lions are winning the division right now in a runaway, in large part because of that class and because of what they're getting from the 2023 class. So, things right now are obviously very negative in the fan base, but if you can hit on a couple draft classes, like really hit, things can turn around so quickly, even in like a tough like cap space scenario for the Chargers next year. If they hit on 3 guys in next year's draft class, you can turn this thing around so quick, like some of these teams have done.
Yeah, and the Chargers almost did it in 2021 with even just the first 2 picks with Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. When those guys were playing, and obviously Slater was him, and Zahn, I don't recall how early he got involved, but he was playing much better than he currently is.
Like right away, he had an interception against the Commanders. He was like a great game that week, so it was right away for Asante.
Yeah, you just have to obviously keep going, but you can, if you can find, I don't know if it would matter this year, but you can find one more Tuli Tuipulotu contributor there, or in the first round, anybody else other than Quentin at this point. You could see, I don't know, an entirely different season for the Chargers this year because of all the other issues, but it would have been more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think that is the last thing we wanted to talk about here is the just snap counts by the draft class. So
Yeah,
Tyler, why don't
we can
you?
just jump over to so I was just bored. I don't know. I was just curious how much the Chargers players are playing in 2023 compared to other teams. And so this previous one was the Chargers classes and how many snaps they're playing in total this season, and then on average per player. So just looking at it, obviously the 2022 class is playing more. A lot of Jamari Sawyer in there and Zion on there. It's tough. I don't think this graphic or what I found out really means anything, because of course, like Jordan Davis is going to play less than a safety who's out there the entire game.
Sure.
A quarterback who's a third string quarterback like Hendon Hooker isn't going to play a lot. But I was just curious where the Chargers were in terms of contributions this year in average snap count compared to the 4 contenders. I left out the 49ers only because their draft class was basically just, oops, we went and got Trey Lance.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that was like a
Yeah.
good way to evaluate what's going on. So I went with the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Eagles, and the Lions. And in terms of in terms of average snap counts per player drafted in the last 3 classes and their average snap counts this year, the Lions and the Chiefs are getting the most, followed by the Chargers at 3rd, and then the Ravens and Eagles at 4th and 5th. But like you talked about with Nolan Smith, that doesn't mean that these players are not good, that these are bad picks. It's just some of these teams are really freaking good, and they draft and develop players really, really well. And so they have elite prospects just sitting on the back burner, whereas the Chargers, injured or other players aren't panning out or whatever, they're playing more now. So I don't know if it means a ton, but I did want to look at it. And the Lions are just the class of everything right now. If you're looking for a future GM, I think the way the Chiefs have manipulated and changed things, the Lions, the way they've manipulated and changed things, navigating, trading away Stafford or trading away Tyreek Hill, and then finding ways to hit on several players. I think the Lions and the Chiefs are 2 teams you look at to try to get the best next GM possible.
Yeah. And I think for different reasons, you're probably trying to poach what's happening in Philadelphia. Obviously the aggressive nature that they roll with, I think is very unique to their own, as Alex can vouch for. So it is a valuable exercise looking at snaps played. The Chargers are probably a lot lower on this list if Mike Williams and Josh Palmer are healthy. So if Otito Ogbonia starts the season healthy, we never see Scott Matlock, and he played a lot at the beginning of the year. So it is what it is. All right, Tyler, any final thoughts on this before we get to some of these questions?
No, but I think yes, one random thing. Trust the stats and the composite rankings when it comes to running backs. I looked at the last couple of classes, and if you took the top 15 running backs, we do composite rankings just for fun. Like 13 out of the 15 running backs in our top 15 are like the ones you are good, that are good. Now, some of that's easy. Bijan Robinson, yeah, he's very good. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, he's very good. But like Keaton Mitchell was 3rd in our composite rankings. Yeah. And lo and behold, there it is. Isaiah Spiller was 12th. So I think that when it comes to the draft, trust the numbers sometimes. The RAS helps too. Film, of course, but trust the numbers, because I think that in this particular case, it's almost easy to find out who the good running backs are if you do your homework enough. Although we've only done this twice, so I don't know.
Yeah, there are certain positions where college stats actually matter, but I think a lot of times the NFL in general, and this is not just a Chargers problem, this is NFL as a whole. When you watch tape and you see an elite guy and then you look at the numbers and the numbers are elite, maybe athletic score is not super important in that instance. Everybody overthought Brian Branch. Brian Branch absolutely should have been a top 15 pick. He's arguably been right there with Thule as one of the biggest draft steals in the draft experience. But he ran a 4.6, and so it's okay, well, he's not super fast, so he's not a first round pick. It's well, Sam Laporta, same kind of thing. It's well, he plays tight end, and the numbers were elite. The film was elite. Who cares? So again, not just a Chargers problem. That is the
Yeah.
entire NFL. You know, those guys are second round picks. Joey Porter Jr., same kind of thing. So it is what it is. So I think this is a valuable exercise, you know, because I think you want to look at, you know, what other teams are doing. And that's something that we've always seen. It's like, well, we have these complaints. It's like, well, what are other teams doing? This is the exercise that we wanted to put out and look forward to, you know, hopefully the Chargers can turn this around. Again, the great thing about the NFL draft is you hit on one, it drastically changes your future. You know, the 2017 Saints got like 4 starters out of their class, and they were immediately a contender. So, you know, it is what it is.
The good news is that the Chargers, when they stink, they pick higher, and that tends to yield a better first round pick, obviously, for the most part. Justin Herbert, Rashawn Slater. So hopefully picking, I don't know, 7th was what they probably end up this season, unless they go on some ridiculous run. Hopefully that yields a pretty good player.
I don't think they'll be picking that high. I think it's probably more like 12 or 13th. Like, I know, you know, obviously nobody wants to hear that in terms of a draft pick right now, but we'll see what it is. All right, so we'll get to some questions here. Before we do that, obviously I have to tell you guys quickly about some of our sponsors that have been great partners this year. First and foremost, Tyler and I have loved using Prize Picks this year. I had my first 4 for 4 night on Thursday night. So I've had a lot of like 3 for 4 nights. I'm kind of a wussy gambler. I always do like the play where if you get 3 of 4 right, at least you still win money. So that's always what I do. But this Thursday, I finally hit 4 out of 4 with the Seattle Seahawks and Dallas Cowboys putting on a show. So Prize Picks is a super easy to use daily fantasy app. You simply just plug in the players you do more or less than, and you fire up the numbers, and you can win money every single week. So it's been a true treat to play. Tyler's mom obviously has been crushing it on Prize Picks. So Tyler, real quickly, who are your specific Chargers picks this week?
So Keenan Allen is currently at 92.5 receiving yards, which means it went up by 3 yards since I think yesterday. I totally understand in most games why you would consider the more there. And frankly, he's been hitting the more the last 3 games, or in most games, but he's hit over that specific more the last 3 games. He's had 100 yards or more in the last 3 games, but he's got a quad injury. Obviously, he's got the AC joint injury. It's apparently going to be like 40 degrees and potentially raining in Foxborough when I just Googled it. So that doesn't help either. And of course, Bill Belichick is like, Keenan Allen is the offense. You take away him. Frankly, if Gerald Everett has 200 receiving yards, Bill Belichick's probably fine with that. It's going to be anything but Keenan Allen, I think, although Kellen Moore has done a good job. So I would take the less on Keenan Allen there for various reasons. I would take the Derwin James more on 6.5 tackles. I think that while it's not super fun to watch him play deep safety, I think the Patriots basically do everything close to the line of scrimmage, or not deep safety, but slot and stuff like that. I think that Derwin James have a lot of opportunities there. And then, guys, I'm going to go for it because it has to happen at some point, right? We talked about the best way to get back on the fan base's side is to roast JC Jackson. Quentin Johnston's, he said at 19.5 receiving yards. I'm taking the more, guys. It's
just
going to happen.
One big play.
One big play or 2 even average plays, guys.
Yeah.
Just a couple of targets, one good old yak. For Quentin, that is 1 catch potentially. You just need to make that catch. So I'll take the more on Quentin Johnston at 19.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, that's a good one. That is a good one. So hopefully you guys enjoy using Prize Picks. You can go to prizepicks.com/guilty. Use the code guilty at checkout for a deposit match up to $100. Super easy to use. They have a lot of fun stuff. They have every sport on there. It's not just NFL. You can do NBA stuff. You can do college football. It is Championship Saturday. So if you're interested in using Prize Picks to make some picks from the Georgia-Alabama game, for example, you can go and do that. They always do some fun combinations like Taco Tuesday. There was a combination back in the day of a Justin Herbert and Bo Nix combination. So you can go and do that pretty frequently as well. So again, prizepicks.com/guilty, code guilty for a deposit match up to $100. Our other sponsor of the year is Little Caesars. It is the official pizza sponsor of the NFL and the Los Angeles Chargers. and you can use it for free delivery. You can use it for a nice pizza portal pickup on game days. They have a kickoff special 1 hour before the NFL games kick off and for 3 hours afterwards. We all know how good pizza and football go together. So again, make Little Caesars the official pizza sponsor of the NFL and the Los Angeles Chargers part of your game day experience. All right, we'll get to some questions here. We went way longer on our draft exercise than I thought we would, but we can give you guys 10 minutes of questions today. We have some super chats already that we'll get to here in a second. So if you are waiting to ask us a question, now is the specific time. We appreciate you guys here in the chat today. Always do. Always appreciate the super chats. You guys are great supporters of the show, and everything we do is not possible without you guys. So again, 10 minutes for questions. So go ahead and fire away.
Then Alan Silva, I see you sent in the super chat. I know you had a comment afterwards, but if you want to send in a question, Alan, go for it.
Yeah, I think he
had a comment about project drafting, but if you want to ask a question, go for it.
Okay. First question from a super chat of the day is from Matt Meter. I don't know. Apologies there, Matt, but hopefully one of those is right. He wants to know, rate out of 10 how you think Kellen Moore's first season has gone.
I'd say a 7, which sounds not. Some people might think that's way too high. I just think that I don't know what I'm supposed to do without Mike Williams and Josh Palmer and Corey Linsley. I don't really know where, like, that should be taken into account. Yeah. The number one thing is Justin Herbert, and I think he has taken a step forward in general. So there's that. I do like a lot of what they've done, but you're dinged a point for the run game being atrocious, although that's also kind of on the Chargers for not getting another explosive back and for going one more year with Eckler, which I understand, but like he's not looked great. But the lack of development for Quentin Johnston or any involvement at all is a knock there. So yeah, 7 seems fine, and it is a first year sort of thing. So yeah, 7. 6. I like Alex's 6.5. That feels slightly unfair to go 6.5, but I do like that.
Yeah, 6.5, 7 feels right. Like you mentioned, I think like the whole vision that we were promised when the Chargers hired Kellen Moore was we're going to be more aggressive downfield. Mm-hmm. We're going to help Justin Herbert take that next step, and we're going to establish a more firm identity in the run game. I think Justin Herbert objectively has taken a pretty big step in his development. I think the work that he has done from week 1 until this past week in terms of having full control of the offense and the checks and everything like that is objectively a big step forward for him. And he has definitely been more aggressive. The ADOT, which I was curious looking at like how it has changed throughout the whole season, because over the first 3 weeks when everybody was healthy, his ADOT was like 8.6, which is objectively and not even close his highest of his career. And it's maintained at 8.4. Like they're not necessarily getting like the 70-yard bombs that everybody wants and loves, and I get that obviously, but they are objectively more aggressive downfield than any Chargers offense that Justin Herbert has played under, at least doing so more consistently. So those things I think he has met expectations at, and that's a big part of it. The run game has definitely been a huge disappointment, and like I get why it's the case. But I also expected more for sure out of the Kellen Moore rushing experience, especially when they were rushing for 200 yards with all of the preseason guys. And I know like you don't put a ton of stock in preseason, but to me, if you are able to get 200 yards rushing when you have Austin Pleasance and Foster Sorrell and all these like 3rd and 4th string offensive lineman practice squad guys, and Elijah Dotson and Isaiah Spiller, and you're able to rush for 200 yards, like that to me means a lot. And then week 1, obviously they exploded for a huge amount of rushing yards. I expected that to continue. I certainly did not expect it to be arguably worst rushing attack in the league on a week-to-week basis. So it's been some ups and downs for sure for Kellen Moore. It is the first year of the system. He only really got to bring Doug Nussmeier with him. They've had a ton of injuries, so there's a lot of context there. But first and foremost, he's helped Justin take another step in his development. They're more aggressive downfield. So I think they're doing some creative things as well to try and mitigate a lot of the losses, which was never a thing previously under Joe Lombardi or frankly Shane Steichen. So Kellen Moore, I think it's been hit or miss. 6.5 or 7 feels fair to me.
Yeah, I think last thing you sort of touched on it, but Keenan Allen becoming an All-Pro in his age 31 season is pretty impressive too. So the core I think is there. I wish we saw more Mike Williams games because he had his 150 yarder and then got hurt. So it's a bummer that we didn't get to see what could have been two easily 1,300, 1,400 yard receivers this season, and now it's like okay. So the vision never got to be executed. So 7.
Chorizo Compapas says it's the 2024 NFL draft. We're on the clock. Brock Bowers is staring us in the face. What would it take to move out, and how far would you be okay with? I assume this is talking about a trade down experience. We just spent all this time talking about more picks, not less. That being said, if Brock Bowers is on the board, I'm taking him. And I know it's December 2nd. But I think Brock Bowers is a generational kind of prospect at the tight end position. And for me, I think if you have a chance at those kind of players, I think you don't pass on them. So it is December. I have not graded any prospects, but I would be pretty surprised if Brock Bowers is not a top 3 grade in next year's class for me.
Yeah, I watched the one game, and I'll go back and watch 2022 games, but they gave him like a fullback dive on 3rd down, and he got that. They gave him a shallow crosser, and he took that to the house. He can work. His speed off the line is insane. Watching him, like I was thinking about this. Some guys just change your perspective of how you should be evaluating and grading guys. And I would never go back and ungive Dalton Kincaid the 1st round grade that I gave him. But you just see there's another tier that another guy can get, Penei Sewell being one of them. I still considered Kyle Pitts a part of that, even though it hasn't worked out. But man, Bowers, it's completely different with him. Watching what he can do, it's, do you want Kincaid? Not as much as a route runner, I think, but do you want like Musgrave, Kincaid, Mayer, and like Washington almost all in one? Here's your pick. Like he's pretty much got everything that you need. He's tremendous. So if he's there, I get it. And especially if Kellen Moore is still the offensive coordinator, I think you lean into that and what he can provide at so many different levels of the run game. That's almost an easy pick for me. It's not a premium spot there. We just talked about premium positions, but like there's also a sense where, Jalen defensive tackle maybe necessarily isn't one of the 4 core premium positions. But if Jalen Carter's sitting there, the Eagles, you take him, and the Eagles did. I think at 9 too, where the Chargers currently are. So if Brock Bowers is there and he's one of the 3 best players in the class, go for it.
Yeah, you're talking about an elite talent. Like I think that supersedes premium positions and draft and trading down at certain times. I was going to point out, you mentioned Dalton Kincaid. Like I think one of Dalton's biggest strengths was how fast he's able to go from receiver to runner. Like he just has that innate ability to just get downfield in a hurry. Brock Bowers does that, and then he's significantly more athletic. Like I love Dalton Kincaid, but I think he didn't run at the combine or anything. He was injured. I think he's probably like a 4.75, 4.8 guy. Like I don't think Dalton Kincaid is super fast. Brock Bowers is probably going to run like a 4.45, 4.5 kind of talent. Like he's way more athletic than Dalton was. And just has that insane ability. So I don't think he's ever going to be like, an inline blocking tight end type. Like I think it's a very similar evaluation to Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta type, but to that next level because like it's insane. LD Burn pointed this out earlier, and me and him had this conversation. The Chargers have had the 2nd most wins above replacement WAR lost on offense due to injuries this year. They're still hovering around the top 10. As he points out in terms of EPA per play, points, yards, all that good stuff. So Kellen Moore does deserve a lot of credit. Like I know people are pretty harsh on him at certain times, especially for the way that the Chargers have played against high-end defenses. But a lot of the context of this Chargers season makes it like it's a very difficult job that Kellen Moore has. And then Dennis also pointed out too, like you're always trying to chase points because the defense is so bad. Like when you have a defense like the Dallas Cowboys, it's just such an easier job because you don't have to score on every drive. Like the pressure is just ratcheted up right now when this defense is the liability that it is. So again, the context is not an excuse for Kellen Moore. Like he does deserve blame for certain aspects of the way that this season has gone. But I think if you look at objectively, like he's done a good job. Like he's not exceeding expectations, but he's managing everything well. And most importantly, he's gotten a next step forward out of Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
We talked about the Alex Erickson earlier. Oh, Matt Mitri. Okay, cool. Appreciate that, Matt. Seth, this is such. When will the Chargers ever stop sucking? That's where we're at right now. I appreciate the question, Seth, but like I said, man, you can turn your franchise around with 2 or 3 drafts, and that's obviously the hope.
When Alex dies, he says. Yeah, that's when the Chargers will be good. My grandpa was 80 something when the Eagles finally won the Super Bowl. So, Steven, can you imagine we do this for 50 more years and the Chargers have not won a Super Bowl?
Oh man.
Which, by the way, we're not.
No, I mean, like we're not going to do this forever. Like you and I are both obviously married and have our careers. Like this podcast is not going to go on forever. So hopefully I would love to see them get on a run when we're covering the team. But certainly like when I'm still kind of like young-ish, I would like if I'm 80 and that's when they win it, I'm not gonna know what's going on. Like
you know what I mean? Calm down. 80 years old isn't that old.
Jeez. Like when I'm 80, I'm not gonna watch every Chargers game and like pay for
definitely not.
Sunday NFL ticket or whatever. Like this is in 50 years, but obviously I would like to be able to like appreciate the Super Bowl run.
Yeah, I'd love to like get up and run outside and like scream and cheer. And I know what you mean.
I would like to not be in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how fans do it, like Lions fans, Browns fans. Not that the Chargers are any better, but there's like a whole other tier below the Chargers, which typically has been the Lions, the Browns. So, yeah, 50 years would be a long time for nothing to happen. And this is by far the most I don't care about Chargers football that I've ever been. It kind of died the night of the Jaguars loss, but at least okay, maybe see how the season goes. When they lost the Dolphins, I was like, yeah, never mind. This is my fandom is not gonna accelerate much. So, bit in the doldrums recently. I hope that means then that when the Chargers are getting better and they're maybe winning a playoff game, good to show the disappointment now so you guys can be with us when they're good and we can be excited and happy, like genuinely, rather than just going into every season with hype and hope.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll get to some quick hitters here. DZ wants to know any center prospects y'all like. Again, we haven't graded anybody. Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon is a Utah kid. He was in high school when I still lived in Utah. Actually, coached against him when I coached high school football back in the day. He's a fantastic individual. I know his family very well. Great reputation, and he almost scored a touchdown last night. And so he's probably the top center, it seems like, if he declares. He is also an Oregon Duck, so it would be cool to have an Oregon connection and also get some some more Utah love on the Chargers, as well as Cole Bishop, my guy from the safety, which is a position of need for the Chargers. So quick ones there.
I don't know. I watched Brock Bowers. That's all I got so far.
Thomas, do all Chargers fans root for the Lions? We all know what that poor fan base has gone through. I like the Lions, man. I like Dan Campbell. I think they're doing some good things. In terms of like the NFC teams, I would love to see the Lions win the NFC.
Yeah, that'd be great. I generally root for any of the franchises who have not done the whole Super Bowl winning thing. I currently root for one. But then, when the Seahawks were like 7-9 and it was Marshawn Lynch and they upset the Saints or whatever, and that big, like those kind of teams that, at the time were not the great teams that they maybe ended up becoming or whatever. I usually root for them. A lot of Lions, absolutely, 100%. And it's easy to root for an NFC team to be good. Like, I go for it. You're in the NFC. Like, go be good. I don't really care. I hope you do well. Lions, Penei Sewell. I'm sure there's a lot of people who just kind of root for Penei Sewell as is. So yeah,
100%. Alex says we were rooting for the Eagles. You had your chance last year.
I do root for the Eagles, but that's a family thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, my brother's an Eagles fan, so it's good for the family that at least one of our teams is elite.
Do the Chargers sweep the Raiders? Chorizo Campapa says he wants for Christmas for the Chargers to sweep the Raiders. They are 0-2 in Vegas so far. We were at one of those, and I think I had COVID. That was a lot of fun. That sucked.
The game was insane, obviously. And then,
yeah,
we got to record at the Blue Wire studio, so it was a fun trip overall. But the last trip to Vegas, from the Chargers' perspective, was not so fun. That game last year was a train wreck.
No, getting roasted by Josh McDaniels and then Jerry Tillery beating up your interior was not the way it should have gone. I think they win them. I think they beat them in Vegas this year, but that's what I said the last 2 years.
I'm going to say yes, they sweep the Raiders.
If they barely beat the Patriots today or tomorrow, I don't know. Yes. I will pick the Chargers to win because one has Aiden O'Connell and one has Justin Herbert. And Khalil Mack is gunning for 30 sacks.
Yeah.
In one game. So, yeah.
Yeah. Frank Blakely, I really appreciate your super chat. That is not a question we can really get into today. My opinion of Bill Belichick, I'll just answer that part, has gone down drastically over the last few seasons. If I were a GM of an NFL team, I would not touch Bill Belichick with a 10-foot pole right now. I do not think that he is a coach that can succeed in modern football. And you also probably have to trade for him. And I'm not trading for a coach that is well past his prime at this point. In general, not necessarily for the Chargers, obviously.
Yeah. And I'll plead the fifth.
All right, you guys, that's going to do it for us. The Chargers play an early game tomorrow, so we'll be live tomorrow afternoon to recap that game. Excuse me. That's I'm starting to get a little sick here, so apologies for that. But we will be live tomorrow afternoon to recap tomorrow's game. Hopefully, there's some fun things to talk about. We didn't necessarily dive super into this matchup, but Khalil Mack should be due for a pretty big game this week. Hopefully, the offense can score more than, what's our expectation? More than 17 points, and we're good tomorrow.
Sure. This it feels like Jets light.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Appreciate everybody in the chat tonight. Today, excuse me. I'm a mess right now. I apologize. We'll see you guys tomorrow. As always, Bolt up.
See you.